Crimea, 05:38 a.m. A silent Russian military base suddenly became the epicenter of modern warfare. No alarms, no radar, no radio signals. Only silence, then fire. Within just 90 seconds, a $500 million base erupted into a sea of flames, tearing open the night sky. The explosion sent black smoke soaring over 300 meters high. Shockwaves rippled outward like a minor earthquake, visible even from satellite imagery. But the true terror wasn't the explosion, it was the silence before it. Russia's early warning network, S-400s, Panzer S-1s, and multiband radars stood blind, powerless, unaware. How many more bases will vanish in silence? Subscribe and find out.
Газовый баллон.
No drone was intercepted. No siren screamed. The entire base was caught off guard. By the time Russian troops scrambled out of their bunkers, it was already too late. The sky was on fire. What could punch through a $500 million fortress guarded by some of the most advanced air defense systems in the world? Not stealth jets, not cruise missiles, just a swarm of autonomous drones, fast, cheap, and deadly, disappearing back into the chaos they created. Ukraine didn't just take out a military base, they ripped open a fatal gap in Russia's defense doctrine. In a world ruled by radar grids and million-dollar missiles, how did a swarm of low-cost drones slip through untouched? But where is the limit? That base wasn't a temporary outpost. It was the most fortified stronghold in all of Crimea. Stretching over 4 square kilometers, it was wrapped in layers of air defenses, reinforced steel, and military pride. Every structure was engineered to withstand nothing less than a full-scale air campaign. At its center stood the 92N6E gravestone radar, the eye of the S-400, sweeping the skies for more than 200 miles. Nearby, Panzer S-1 systems stood ready to unleash. Further out, S-400 launchers waited silently inside hardened bunkers like spears poised in the shadows. The entire base embodied one unshakable belief: Russia's absolute faith in its steel wall of air defense. The base was built to detect stealth aircraft, intercept ballistic missiles, and survive saturation strikes. Russian media once boasted it was the shield of Crimea's sky. On paper, it was untouchable. That's why the strike at 2:38 a.m. became a nightmare. This wasn't just a base, it was a symbol of Russian pride, torn apart in seconds. By every calculation, Ukraine's cheap drones shouldn't have made it within 16 kilometers. To Moscow, they were nothing more than harmless reconnaissance toys. But that night, theory turned to ash. Those so-called toys shredded the illusion, proving that even low-cost technology can obliterate decades of defensive faith. The shield didn't crack. It shattered. For the first time, Russian generals had to ask themselves, have we been preparing for the wrong war? So how did Ukraine break through one of the most advanced air defense networks on Earth? The answer lies in a new era of warfare, where brains and technology crush walls of steel. At exactly 2:01 a.m., 19 Ukrainian drones slipped into contested airspace. Not million-dollar stealth craft, but cheap, rugged UAVs. 11 Scythe long-range drones, and 8 Beaver FPV units armed with explosives. Alone, they were small and slow. Together, they became a self-guided kill swarm no one expected. Subscribe now, before you fall behind the battlefield. They didn't fly into the kill zone, they slipped through like ghosts. The swarm used nap-of-the-earth tactics, hugging the terrain, weaving beneath trees, ridgelines, and rooftops, forcing Russian radar to look too high, too late. No satellite could save them. They used the Earth itself as a shield, turning Russia's sky blind. It wasn't altitude that killed the radar, it was silence. These drones cut all communication. No GPS, no signal, no link. Russia's jamming towers were useless. They needed no pilot. Every flight path was pre-programmed. A fortress of cutting-edge air defense, once hailed as untouchable, was undone by nothing more than deadly silence. Instead of relying on conventional signals, they used AI to match terrain, analyzing live imagery against satellite maps. No pilot, no mid-course corrections. They flew blind, yet saw everything. By the time Russian systems detected them, the swarm was already on top of the target. A deadly miracle born from a few lines of open-source code. When the radars finally flashed, the drones were only about 1.5 kilometers from the base, too late to stop them. They didn't overwhelm with firepower, they outwitted with cunning and tech. Fortresses once deemed untouchable became soft targets. A $400 drone just rewrote an entire air defense doctrine. On the radar screen, tiny blips appeared, just 2 kilometers out, seconds before impact. Russian troops scrambled to activate defenses. The Panzer S-1 swung into position, target locked. Then the nightmare began. The drones were too small, too low, too slow. On radar, they looked no different from sparrows in flight. In desperation, Russia fired blindly. 2 missiles streaked into the night and exploded in empty air. One accidentally clipped a stray drone. The rest, 17 out of 19, slipped through. Not one layer, but every layer of defense was breached. The so-called Sky Shield of Crimea had just turned into a shredded net.
Defense system became operational in 2011.
On the ground, chaos erupted. Radar screens flickered with errors, commands overlapped, and confusion spread like fire in dry grass.
Oh, sir!
Gunners hesitated, afraid to fire with a massive fuel depot right behind them. The entire defense grid, built for centralized command, was crumbling from within. When the enemy comes from the shadows, no one knows who's truly in control. The proud fortress turned into a labyrinth of fear. This wasn't just a tactical crack, it was a psychological collapse. A swarm of homemade, low-cost drones had just ripped open the soft underbelly of a billion-dollar defense network. The message was chilling. If this base could fall, what in Russia was ever safe? An army built for giants, brought to its knees by machines that cost less than a few $100s. The drones pushed deep, primed for destruction. They didn't just breach the walls, they carried out a surgical execution. The swarm split into 3 teams, striking 3 neural centers. 6 plunged into the radar control station, 5 targeted the fuel lines, and 6 hit the vehicle depot and launch pads. The strikes were surgical and cold. The primary mission? Sever the base's eyes and ears. In seconds, shaped charges punched through and shredded the radar control station. Not huge bombs, but focused warheads that concentrated their blast on a single point. The result? Systems blinded, power cut, communications severed. The defense network's nervous system collapsed in an instant. Next, the second wave dived straight into the underground fuel lines. Thermal cameras locked onto every valve and high-pressure conduit with surgical precision. When the charges detonated, fire shot backward through the pipes like a giant detonator, blowing the entire fuel depot apart from within. What began as a spark turned into an inferno, transforming the base into a living hell. Thick black smoke rose hundreds of meters high, blanketing the skies over Crimea. Meanwhile, the final group unleashed chaos on the vehicle yard and ammunition depot. Trucks, mobile radars, and fuel tankers sat tightly packed. Perfect fuel for a chain explosion. The drones didn't need heavy bombs, they just had to strike the weak spot. One armored vehicle was hurled aside, a missile container erupted and shockwaves rippled across 8 kilometers. The entire base descended into absolute chaos. These explosions weren't chaos, they were precision. The drones didn't strike at random. They hit the base's vital nerves, choosing to cut tendons instead of crush flesh. Within 5 minutes, a $100 million fortress was stripped of all combat power. Ukraine didn't just inflict damage, they surgically removed the base's ability to fight back. The attack ended in 5 minutes, yet the aftermath looked worse than a week-long air campaign. Russia's air defense pride now lay twisted and cratered in ash. Most notably, the Big Bird 91N6E radar, the very heart of the S-400 system, was struck directly in its rotating head. A technological crown, shattered in flames. Big Bird radar went down, leaving the S-400 blind. $500 million turned to scrap in seconds. The chain-linking radar, launcher, and command center was shattered. The once impenetrable air defense bubble over southern Crimea was gone. The sky, once untouchable, became a deadly void, wide open to the enemy. When the fuel line erupted, a fireball more than 300 meters high lit up the night sky. U.S. satellites immediately captured the blast, while shockwaves rattled a town 16 kilometers away. At least 8 military vehicles, from radar trucks to command carriers, were obliterated. Several storage bunkers ignited in a chain of explosions, consuming the entire base in fire. Western estimates put the damage above $250 million, with the Big Bird radar alone valued at $120 million. But money is not the greatest loss. The real cost is capability, readiness, and reputation. In minutes, Ukraine did more than knock out a base. It struck down a symbol of Russian power. The fortress, once a show of dominance, now lies in ruins, felled by cheap drones. The message is cold and clear. Nowhere is safe anymore. Ukraine did not seek total destruction. It targeted the nerves of the system and hit the critical points. It did not need to obliterate everything. It only needed to blind them all. By taking out the Big Bird radar and the S-400 command center, Ukraine didn't just strike. It disconnected an entire defense network. One precise hit silenced the skies within an 80-kilometer radius. The airspace once thick with missiles and radar waves fell into dead silence. And that silence was the real terror. This wasn't just a drone strike, it was a war for information. Ukraine proved that in modern warfare, you don't need stealth jets or hypersonic missiles to dominate. You just need to take away your enemy's ability to see and react. In a world where the first 5 minutes decide everything, Ukraine owned that night, completely. When the radar and command links vanished, the defensive web collapsed. The illusion of invulnerability shattered, and the door flung wide open for follow-on strikes. More swarms, airstrikes, even deeper electronic attacks. This is the new kind of war. Strike the enemy's weakest link where expensive weapons become worthless. Russia didn't lose because it lacked hardware. It lost because it underestimated the enemy's imagination and ingenuity.
The automatic cannons can engage targets within 6,000 meters.
Panzer S-1s and cutting-edge radars was felled by an assault centered on drones costing a few $1,000s. No satellites, no stealth, just AI and strategy. The bitter lesson: to scorn the weak is to invite self-destruction.